This is Aftercast. You've got episode 35. Hello, this is Brandy Bensel, and I am pleased to welcome you to Aftercast, the audio companion to the Afterthoughts blog. For many years now, Afterthoughts has been a sort of intellectual watering hole for all of you classical Charlotte Mason homeschooling mamas out there. I like to call you Afterthinkers. You are thinking people, idea people, who never let a good book go to waste. You keep yourselves intellectually agile by reading books, often old books, and seeking out the best that has been thought and said and mixing it into your everyday lives of laundry and dishes and dinner and long division. Season 3 of Aftercast is sponsored by Charlotte Mason Boot Camp. Want to whip your Charlotte Mason muscles into shape? If so, my intense 6-week Charlotte Mason Boot Camp might be just the ticket. It'll take that philosophical flab and turn it into nothing less than confidence. I offer 3 sessions of Charlotte Mason Boot Camp per year, spring, summer, and fall. In 2019, I'm doing something extra special. I'm offering 2-week intensives, deep dives into some part of Charlotte Mason's philosophy, and it's available only to Charlotte Mason Boot Camp alumni. You know you want in, so to get on the Charlotte Mason Boot Camp interest list, go to afterthoughtsblog.net/CM bootcamp and sign up. Today is the final installment of this Learning How to Live series. What I tried to do, and hope I accomplished, was take the categories we've been discussing these past few weeks and show how they play out in my life. Not because the way I do it is the one right way, but simply because it's always helpful to have an example of how this might work. I hope you find it helpful as we look at different ways to learn in the midst of busy days. How she learns. My personal continuing education journey. Okay, before I even read this, I just have to tell you guys that I wrote this 4 years ago, and so I want to read it, but at the same time, many of the details have changed and are no longer true. So this is going to be kind of a weird episode because it's going to be a combination of me reading the actual text of the post as I usually do, and me doing commentary and making changes as I go along because I just can't bear to say something that isn't actually true right now. So, let's start with the actual text and see how it goes. I've already told you that I think the possibilities are endless. There are a million creative ways that we can continue learning while we do this wife, mom, homeschool, insert other job name here gig. So today I'm going to tell you what I actually do. Keep in mind, it looked almost totally different when I had 4 little children, 3 of whom were under the age of 4. I was lucky at that time if I was able to get in that 30 minutes per day minimum. These days, my youngest child is the age my oldest child was back then. And, now my youngest child is 10. But it's still true. There are no high chairs at my dining table. Everyone can take a shower and go to the bathroom and get themselves into the car on time without assistance. It's just a different stage. When you're in the midst of those busy early years, it feels like it lasts forever. And for people who are blessed with more children, it does last a lot longer than it did for me. But eventually that stage comes to an end, and things are just different. There is more time beyond the minimum. This is what I do with my time. I'm going to use some of the categories from my previous episode on a mama's continuing education to guide my explanation. I inadvertently used some things that I do as examples in that episode, so I'm not going to repeat myself here. This is whatever I failed to mention before, meaning that the 2 episodes together give a full picture of how I approach this part of life. Variety of reading. During the school year, I choose very few books for myself because my number one priority is to pre-read for my students. Because I've been pre-reading all along, this mostly consists of reading for Ambleside Online Year 7. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there because my oldest completed Ambleside Online Year 10 last year, and then this year, I had planned originally to do Ambleside Online Year 11 with him, but he ended up going into a Great Books tutorial program. It was just the perfect opportunity for him. But the result is that there are now very few things I have to pre-read for him because that covers 4 complete subjects for him. So I now spend very little time in pre-reading, which means now I can choose books for myself. But this was true at the time, and I am going to read it because I think it's helpful. Originally, I approached pre-reading as a chore that got in the way of the things I wanted to read. A couple years in, I realized I was reaping huge benefits from the AO curriculum, that I was actually becoming a better educated person, and that entirely changed my attitude. I submitted to the curriculum as something that wasn't just good for my children, it was good for me. So I got a commonplace journal, a book of centuries, and a nature journal, and I started pursuing the curriculum as my own form of learning. This means that right now, or at the time I wrote this, I was reading 18 books on a variety of subjects. Thankfully, AO reads these books in very small bites, so it wasn't as overwhelming as it sounds. Because we were finally in the upper school years, most of the books were actually written for adults, and they were a feast. I really couldn't wait until my study and prep time. So my reading at that time fell into the broad categories that basically were the categories of a normal high school curriculum, right? So history, geography, philosophy, logic, literature, poetry, government and econ, citizenship, science and nature lore. I was not able to read much in addition to the curriculum. So at the time that I wrote this, I was reading a book for the AO Mother's Education course project that we were working on, and I was trying to slowly finish up a couple things that I had been reading over the summer, and that was it. So there were 2 big categories missing from the list above. I don't know if you noticed them, but I tend to cover those in other forms. So the reading I chose for myself at that time was seasonal. I would squirrel away books for a break week, the Christmas holidays, summer break, that kind of thing. I had to be really picky because most of my reading was not my own. The importance of scheduling. If I didn't have a scheduled time to read, it wouldn't get done, at least not consistently. As much as I love to read, it would be drowned out by other duties. I have set aside Sunday afternoons for reading, but in the year that I wrote this, I also was doing some reading on Friday or Saturday afternoons if it fit in. Year 7 of Ambleside Online was quite a lot to read, and I wanted my Sunday reading to feel leisurely and not rushed. Magazines. I mentioned magazines in my previous episode, and I highly suggest the ones I mentioned, and I did update that particular episode so that it included, for example, Commonplace Quarterly, which is the new Charlotte Mason magazine that just started this year, and it's wonderful. I think good blogs can also be a sort of magazine, and we can get a lot out of reading them. I really try personally to use blogs for education, and they have always served me well. With some blogs, I will subscribe for a season. For example, when I was preparing to refinish some furniture I owned, I subscribed to a number of blogs that focused on furniture repair and painting, and I learned a ton. After the project, though, I unsubscribed to those blogs. There are other blogs that I've subscribed to for many years. I use a feed reader called Feedly, and I've divided it into categories: educational philosophy, theology and culture, nature, lore, and science, blogging and web design, news, food and health. On weekdays, this is often where I do my reading. Okay, that's actually not true now. So I'll say that at that time, that was true. I've really cut back on blog reading. I find that blogging, as blogging has become more of a business for people, the quality of posts has significantly decreased. And so I subscribe to far fewer blogs than I used to. I don't spend as much time reading them. I spend a lot more time now on books and actually podcasts. So it's just a change in life. But at that time, here's the thing. I still think a good blog is worth subscribing to. I just think many blogs are trying to sell you something and not really, it's just not the same. The culture is just not the same. And that makes me sad. But you know what? Time moves on and that's how life is. So lectures. My ability to listen to podcasts ebbs and flows. When I walk outside with my children, which happens more in fine weather than in the summer, I don't bring a gadget along if I'm walking with my children. I'm often in my podcast reader or in my podcast app, I am unsubscribing and moving things around because like I said in the previous episode, I think using a twaddle filter for all of these things is a good idea. Our time is limited, so we must make the most of it. So if you have a podcast that you're listening to and you're repeatedly thinking it's a waste of time, unsubscribe. My word, we don't have to subscribe to everything. So if you have a favorite podcast, you can feel free to drop by the show notes and tell me what it is. I always like to hear about a new one. Local group meetings. So at the time I wrote this, I was part of 2 local groups, technically speaking. So the first was a small group and it was the leadership team for the larger group. So we felt like the leaders of our local group needed to be being fed and challenged at the level that they were at. And we had a lot of newbies in our big local group. And so what we did was we had the leadership team meet once a month and we were reading through a Charlotte Mason volume together. And then we had the local group meeting once a month and they were reading through stuff together. I really can't recommend a local group enough. It was a great experience. But as time went on, everybody in that leadership team moved away and left me here. And I'm not bitter, not at all. Or maybe I'm not permanently. I'm not bitter all the time is probably more accurate. But anyway, so when they moved away, then we moved away from having 2 meetings a month, which really just at the stage of life I'm in, my teenager's always stealing my car and it wouldn't have been practical anyway. So now we're down to 1 local group meeting per month. And then my co-leader and I have lots of opportunities to study together on our own without making an outing from the house during the week. So next is children as a category. Okay, this didn't really fit into my mother culture post from before, but I feel like I can't leave off without mentioning it. So this idea appears in the original article upon which I based my mother culture post. Remember, that was a historical post. We were looking at the article called Mother Culture that appeared in the Parents' Review in the late 1800s. So here's the quote. It says, "Then she can listen to her children and perhaps do a little thinking, not about frocks and foods, but about characters and how to deal with them. Or she can take a book and grow that way." The emphasis of the article is upon reading, so that's where I put my emphasis in the episode. But I did want to mention this. It is a worthwhile expenditure of time to sit and thoughtfully, honestly observe my children. Usually before I do this, I pray that God will give me eyes to see because it is so easy to invent excuses for why our children are the way that they are. A few times a year, I try to sit and observe, and then I tell my husband what I'm thinking. And from there, we try and devise a plan of action for how to help our children overcome their faults and weaknesses. Sometimes when something is really going wrong with a child, we can read and read, and nothing comes of it. But when we spend time in mindful observation, we are able to untangle the mystery. So our children can sometimes be an area of study. And in conclusion, this is my conclusion. It still makes me laugh that this turned into such a big series. So when I first wrote the Learning How to Live post, which was the original blog post that I wrote over 4 years ago, I did not have in mind to write a series on all of this stuff. And I certainly didn't have in mind to record all of that series as a podcast. So it's just funny how things grow over time. It has been such a delightful journey, and it's been fun after 4 years to revisit it all and re-walk through all of those things and just remind myself that mamas need to always be learning and growing. But I don't think we have to limit ourselves to one thing. I mean, yes, I think it's important to read regularly. I think that is a non-negotiable. But with that said, it can start to feel we we can't balance everything. And I think the balance comes from getting a little bit creative and saying, this magazine is sufficient right now, or this podcast is going to substitute for this book that I wish I had time to read, but I just don't right now in this crazy stage of life. So anyway, I hope you have found this encouraging, and I hope that you see all of these things, all of these as options, all the things we've talked about here at the end as options. So not burdens to carry and more obligations that you have, but just options, fun ways to keep growing because, as I say at the end of the Scalé Sisters podcast, we talk about homeschooling be a marathon, and homeschooling is a marathon, and we want to finish well. And I don't know how to guarantee finishing well. I haven't finished yet, but I do think continuing in perseverance involves staying inspired and learning and growing ourselves. So I hope that you have felt inspired to do that. This is the end of this series. Aftercast will be back, but we're going to take a break for a while. So if you want to catch me somewhere else, feel free to hop on over and subscribe to Scalé Sisters, because that's where I'm going to be the next few months. And then make sure you're subscribed here so that you don't miss it when I start the next season, because I will admit I'm not super scheduled. I record these when I have time, and then we run the season until it's over, and then I hope to find time to record the next season. So thank you all for joining me for this season. It's been a ton of fun. And that's a wrap, not just for today, but for season 4. I'll be taking a break for a while, as I mentioned, and if you want to keep in touch, I invite you to go over to afterthoughtsblog.net/about and subscribe. This will give you access to my almost weekly newsletter, wherein you will find a fresh supply of Charlotte Mason and homeschool inspiration and encouragement. I'll be speaking at the Great Homeschool Conventions in 2019 in Fort Worth and Ontario, plus the Ambleside Online Conference in April, so I hope I get to meet some of you someday soon. And finally, don't forget, in the midst of your busy days, that mothers are people too. Just like your children need sunshine and good food and sleep and, yes, good books to read, so do you. So go, read a book, think a thought, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next season.